Welcome, everybody.
to our February book club, all about the power of Scrum.
All about people. And that is why I started calling myself a caretaker. That is what this quote is about. Honestly, I didn't really start with Scrum. My life of Scrum started with something else, which is called extreme programming. I don't know if anybody's heard about it. Extreme programming, and one of the agile methods, frameworks, whatever you want to call it. And as the name says, with an extreme focus on programming practices. Things like, I don't know if anybody knows that, pair programming, continuous integration, test-driven development, or meaning test-first development, beautiful principles like collective code ownership and so on. Really wonderful. And then we wrapped, and that's essential, we wrapped those practices in Scrum. And that, in a way, relates to this quote, because with Scrum, you create a frame. They often say that Scrum is a framework. That is not true. With Scrum, you create a framework. Scrum in itself is, as defined in the Scrum Guide, it's not like you're reading a framework, but with the rules described in the Scrum Guide, if you would go out there and apply those rules, you would create a frame, literally, a frame within which people operate. And within that frame, you need practices. And Scrum doesn't define what those practices should be. Now, I was extremely lucky, and that was not the first time in my career. I was extremely lucky in 2003 because I worked with a very motivated team that really wanted to do this. That was a huge difference to start with. So we did extreme programming. We did it all the way. We did everything. We did with pair programming. We did continuous integration. We had a complete multidisciplinary team. We had testing people on board. We had writers on board. We had everything on board in the team. In a way, by accident, because we started from scratch, greenfield. And sometimes it helps to have no prior knowledge, because we just did it without thinking too much about it, which is also a problem with people, overthinking things. So we just did it. We had everything on board, but we had very intrinsically motivated people. I didn't have to tell them what to do, how to do this, to build quality and so on. So we had great practices and great people. And that is important because with Scrum, you only create a frame. Within that frame, you need clear identified practices to apply, agreed practices, plus great people. And that's what this quote is about. So you will be successful with Scrum, not because of the process in itself, but because of the way that people act and interact and relate and connect and collaborate within the frame you create. And why was I so lucky? Because as from day one, I had this experience of having really working with a great team, but also they had really great development practices in place. And as I moved on in my career and things changed and I changed environments, I find out in a very painful way that it wasn't always that obvious to have that in place. It's fascinating. From 2003 until 2007, I did Scrum with largely the same team. There was some changes. We did different types of work. I was also working at a consulting company, by the way. That's why we had that variety of work. And then in 2007, I changed environments and so on. And suddenly what was so difficult, having to make things explicit that before that were implicit. And I learned that you can't make people be motivated. You can try to create an environment that inspires people, but you can't make people intrinsically motivated. That's against the word also, intrinsic motivation. And suddenly I found myself in a position as a silly, poor, whatever, Scrum Master, whatever you want to call it, of having to explain the value of great development practices to development people, which was the world turned upside down. But it was around the same period in 2007 that suddenly a lot of things became clear for myself in the sense of what am I about? Because I was a person that was it part of that largely the same team, similar teams that I've been working with the years before. And at some point he said, he approached me privately Well, in a face-to-face conversation, he said, Gunther, do you know why I like working with you so much? First of all, that was a surprise to me that he liked working with me. And he said, because you're all about people. And that was very strange, a sort of insight, almost an epiphany for myself. Oh, yeah, that's true. Because he said, Gunther, you will not stop until you have a happy team, until you have happy users, until you have happy customers, happy stakeholders. You will just not give up until, and that was, yeah, cool indeed. And Scrum is a tool for that. And then again, time went by. And in 2016, when I left Scrum.org, so I had worked for 2-3 years at Scrum.org. I don't know if anybody knows the organization of Ken Schreiber. And when I left, I had to think about a title for myself. We're all talking about LinkedIn and so on, and we're going to share profiles and we're going to connect with each other. Beautiful. In 2016, I left Scrum.org. I had a beautiful title there. It was called Director of the Professional Scrum Series at Scrum.org. I was called Director. And I left Scrum.org. Before that, I was working at Capgemini, by the way, another consulting company, also beautiful title. I was Principal Consultant at Capgemini. I was the Global Scrum Leader and whatever the agile value proposition manager, whatever, a combination of titles. Now, I don't care too much about titles. So when I left Scrum.org in 2016, I formulated for myself the ambition to do this thing that Michael called as humanizing the workplace. This restoring this respect for the people aspect of work. Because also with Scrum, the people aspect is extremely important, but it's also extremely ignored by organizations because they all look at the process side of Scrum. Are we having a sprint planning? Are they doing data Scrum? Is it not taking more than 15 minutes? Do we have whatever? You have to work in sprints of 2 weeks, whatever. So they're all so much focused on the process of Scrum. And I felt like there's a really unbalance, a total unbalance. It's all about process and not enough about people. And in my book, I also described Scrum's DNA. So the string of the combination of the two strings, DNA. I said Scrum's DNA consists of those two strings, and the one string is the process aspect of Scrum. It's what we call empiricism, meaning inspection adaptation. And the other string is the people aspect of Scrum, which is self-organization or is reflected in self-organization. So when I left Scrum.org in 2016, I had to come up with a title for myself on LinkedIn. I had my one-person company that I started in 2013 when I left Capgemini, and I partnered with Ken via my one-person company because Ken didn't want to start a company in Belgium and Scrum.org is in Massachusetts, let's say across the big river in between us. And I worked for Scrum.org here in my home office in Antwerp, and I had my little one-person company. And when I left Scrum.org, I had to come up with a title for myself. And almost intuitively, sometimes I have these strange things in my mind. I don't know, some things hidden somewhere in my brain. I don't know. And I decided to call myself a Scrum caretaker. And that is because I care for Scrum, but also I feel like the word caretaker reflects that I also care about people. So caretaker in itself, for me, already surfaces the idea of the importance of people. And then later on, I added independent to that to make clear that I'm a one-person company. I can speak freely, I can speak independently. I'm not hindered by commercial interest or whatever, salespeople pushing me to say this or use the right terms or be more commercial, whatever. So that sort of, it all boils down to people. And then later on, I added an independent Scrum caretaker on a journey of humanizing the workplace with Scrum. And I still feel that is extremely important. Earlier on in one of the slides, one of the future sessions of this group was about preventing burnouts. It's something I already like a lot. And I'll tell you why. Because burnouts, depressions, long-term absenteeism, and so on, long-term illness is a huge problem. Not just in Belgium, but I'm sure you recognize it everywhere. And what bothers me a lot when people respond to that is how to better deal with burnouts, how to better treat burnouts, how to better accept people coming back from burnouts. It's never about how to make sure that people don't end up in a burnout. And that's something I really hate in the public debates, politicians and so on. It's never about what needs to change in the workplace, in the way that we manage people, in the way that you treat people. What do we need to change to make sure that people don't end up in those burnouts again? And that's this idea about humanizing the workplace. And that is extremely important for me because I'm very sure, and there's research about that, obviously, that motivated, engaged people plainly perform better. End of discussion. That's as simple as that. So if my invitation to organizations has been, nobody listens, but that's okay, to not focus on performance anymore, but focus on a psychologically safe environment where people feel okay, people feel energized, a lot based on what is then called that self-organization. Every single human being is able to self-organize. We all do that in our private life. We do that all day long, every day, all year long, every month, whatever. We plan our holidays. We plan to buy a house. We plan to move houses. There's so much events in our private lives that nobody is telling us how to do that or how to follow a methodology or whatever to achieve that. So people have the natural ability to self-organize. So the big challenge is not to make people self-organize in the workspace, but to unleash that potential that everybody has to self-organize. Take away all the barriers that impede people from self-organizing. Because I say in terms of agile, I always say that people are naturally agile. People are naturally flexible. They are not rigid. They adapt to circumstances and insights all the time, every day, every week, every month, every year of their personal life. So how about really unleashing that potential in the workplace? And that's what I call humanizing the workplace. So my belief is that if an organization, as from now on, would start focusing not on performance, not on productivity, not on utilization, whatever, not treating people like resources, but on a humanized workplace, that productivity performance would skyrocket. But that's not how we work, because performance is an effect and impact, almost a side effect of collaboration and interaction. I often call whatever we do is in the first place, it's all about people, it's in the first place an interaction game. It's how people interact, how they work together, how they solve things together, how they create stuff together. And no process, no bureaucracy, no methodology can do that better than self-organizing, engaging people. And with Scrum, if we create a frame, that is boundary within which self-organization should happen. And with all those companies out there focusing on the process and telling people how to do that, and I don't know, I call that, by the way, I call that industrializing your Scrum to death. It's what organizations like to do. That means an organization introduces Scrum, adopts Scrum, whatever, and then top down, they say that all teams have to work in 2 week sprints. And all teams, sprints, have to start and end on the same day. I was like, yeah, but that's crazy. And it goes completely against the nature of Scrum, because Scrum is a framework and it is an open framework. And then ask people in those organizations, why 2 week sprints? And they have no idea because they tell us to do that. And I ask them, what does Scrum say about that? And they have no idea. And I tell them, Scrum only says 4 weeks or less. That's the only rule that Scrum has. So that's part of one of the boundaries. And how to fill in, let's say, that boundary, that's totally up to teams. So that all those companies, what I say, industrializing their Scrum to death, it means they take away all of the openness and flexibility that Scrum, by nature, by default, offers. And then it becomes rigid again. And then it's not helpful again. And that is all tied into that idea of humanizing the workplace, working with people, respecting people for what they are, respecting people for their self-organizing capabilities, which includes defining what should our sprint lengths be, because we work within those boundaries of Scrum. And we were talking about my little book, and what I found important when I wrote my book, by the way, there's a story behind that. Shall I tell you about writing my book? Because I think maybe even Michael might believe that I wanted to write a book about Scrum, but that is not true at all. So in early 2013, having done Scrum for 10 years, I was working at Capgemini. I'd been working there for since 2010. Some really tough but challenging, beautiful times. Also working with large organizations. From 2003 to 2007, I worked with fairly small, medium organizations in Belgium. And then as I moved to Capgemini, after a year, they discovered my presence, the fact that I live on this planet. They discovered that in the Netherlands. And Capgemini Netherlands urgently needed people with proven experience in Scrum, and they didn't find anybody in the Netherlands at that time. So they came to look me up in Belgium. And suddenly I had to work with large organizations. And in the first place, the big bank, ING, where's the Orange Line Bank, a company like Philips, some really big insurance companies. And for instance, to give an example, by then in 2011, early 2011, when I started working with ING, it was the biggest IT employer of the Netherlands. They had 10,000 people working in IT alone. So I had to, and then I discovered another important lesson in life. Sometimes it's good that you take your time, because I had been doing Scrum for 7 years in a row in various technologies, various people, various types of teams, various industries, just plainly Scrum. Clear, simple, with variations within, let's say, within the frame. And then working with those large organizations, I discovered for myself, having done Scrum for 7 years in a row, really helped me stand my ground. Because those large organizations, they like to twist whatever they do to their situation, their departments, the way that they work and that they organize. And then you get the strange things that they want to do something new because they want to change. But at the same time, the things that will help them change, they twist them so much that they don't represent change anymore, which is strange. But then there was me, strange, little humble Belgian working with, if I know people in Belgium, in the Netherlands, outspoken, very direct, very clear communication, whatever. And there was, but I was able to stand my ground. No, what I want to do is not Scrum, it's not going to help because of this and that. So I was able to stand my ground, really helpful. But when in 2013, I was doing a lot of work. I was also in the meantime a professional Scrum trainer, licensed by Scrum to Talk. And in early 2013, I was working for Capgemini. They had this big training institute, part of Capgemini, called the Capgemini Academy. I don't know if in your organizations you have things like that. I can't assume some of you do. And I was approached by the head of the Capgemini Academy saying, Gunther, I'm in touch with a publishing company in the Netherlands. Publishing company specialized in IT, software, whatever technology types of books. And they have this book about Scrum in the pipeline, and they are looking for reviewers. Do you want to review the manuscript of the book they have in the pipeline? And I said, oh, yeah, no problem. I would love to do that. And that company in the Netherlands, by then, really, there was a Scrum boom happening in the Netherlands. During the period I was working there with Capgemini, I don't know why, but I felt like being in the middle of that storm, by the way. So I imagine Dutch publisher really wanted a book about Scrum because it was really all over the place. And they sent me the manuscript, and I was reading the manuscript. And after first of all, I'm a perfectionist also, which is not helpful, because I was reading the manuscript and like every page word and change tracking. So the first 5 pages were already full of change tracking. I was like, no, this is not going to help. I have to have the discipline, which I don't have, to read it first and then read it again and then only start changing things. But it didn't work out for me. So I think about after 1/3 of the book, I gave up. Not just because I was changing so much, but the reason was that I was changing so much, I realized, because it wasn't a good book. And I was reading about it, and it dragged in things from methodologies and other things. And the parts in the manuscript that were actually about Scrum were copy-paste paragraphs from the Scrum guide. I was like, oh my God, I recognized that. So I was very sure, not have no idea who the author was. I never knew, by the way. That was anonymous. for the publishing company, it was very clear to me that this was not being written by somebody who was well versed or experienced in Scrum. And being that humble little Belgium, I was scared to give that sort of feedback to the publisher. I felt like, who am I to say those things? Who am I to say that it's not good, whatever. So it literally stuck something on my computer for several weeks. And then I decided to give it a chance anyhow again. So I picked up the manuscript again, and I was trying to keep myself from changing things with change tracking and so on. And I thought, let's go through it anyhow. In Dutch, we have this expression of, we call it diagonally reading. So just going through it, browsing through it anyhow. So that's what I did. I formulated a sort of minimal list of remarks for the publisher because I felt like they've entrusted me with this. I gotta be honest, I gotta be courageous, I gotta overcome myself and give them honest feedback anyhow. So I produced a minimal list of remarks, which was actually a pretty large list. And after a few weeks, the publisher came back to me saying, oh, Gunther, we have received feedback from various reviews because there were more reviews, not just me. It seems I have no idea who they were. And they were all not too positive about the book. But they felt like my feedback was going really deeper than most of the feedback they had. And they asked me the open question, would you know anybody, because we're going to stop this project, we're going to stop this, we're not going to proceed with this. Do you know anybody who's able to create a book about Scrum? Because we still want a book about Scrum. And it made me think, so I asked a few people, including Ken Schwaber, what do you guys think? Do you think I could be the one writing such a book? And they all said, yes, of course you can. I'm not sure why they said so. I really can't believe they were honest about it. And then things started boiling in my head, and I felt, yeah, okay, let's give this a try. Because I had been blogging about Scrum since 2009. I had written about many aspects of Scrum, also at Capgemini, also internally created a sort of method within Capgemini around it and so on. So I felt like, yeah, in the end, it's going to be a piece of cake, right? Oh, I can do this. I've got lots of things. I'll just collect all those and put them together. And here you have a book. It wasn't that easy, unfortunately. So I started doing that. And then I felt, no, it's not good enough. And I'm reading it again. And then in the end, I created something. I think, I don't know, Michael, how you feel about it when you translated it, something very minimal. And Ruth, in the networking sessions we had, you talked about simplicity. You talked about even at J&T, you look for simplicity, which is beautiful because that's one of the statements of the Agile Manifesto, the simplest thing that might possibly work. So I wrote a book against the ambition to make it as minimal as possible, but still sufficient. And in the end, that's what I spent the most time on it. Eliminating stuff, getting stuff out of it. And that's still something I miss in a lot of books because it's a book club. A lot of books, I feel like, yeah, but why are you saying this again and again? You know, I'm not stupid. I like things to be minimal. And so I published the first version. I wrote it in the period I was leaving Capgemini because shortly after I was reviewing that, I decided to leave Capgemini to go work with Ken Schwaber as his partner. So I wrote it in that time, took a lot more time than expected. It was published by the end of 2013, and then it was updated a couple of times. Last update was from last year. But what was for me important in that book was to go back to the essence of Scrum, and that's connected to what I call a framework to describe what I call the rules of Scrum. It's the rules of the game. I don't know if Scrum adds from the game of rugby. Huh? In that sense, Scrum is a metaphor to emphasize the importance of teamwork in product development and development in general even. So the importance of teamwork. And I decided to go back to that idea of the rules of Scrum. And rather than explain the Scrum Guide, but in different words, that was not enough. I wanted to focus on the why of the rules. Why do we have those rules in place? Why is it so important? How do they connect together? Because Scrum is minimal. That means that there's nothing in it that in a way you could eliminate because that was already done for us. It was already, if it wasn't substantial, if it was missable, it was already removed from Scrum anyhow. So our book, two big chapters. The one is about the rules of the game, explaining Scrum, the rules of the game, and then a next chapter about tactics to apply the rules. Because that's also how it works in sports, right? Like in rugby, I don't know, volleyball, football, or soccer, basketball, whatever. You've got the rules of the game, and then they've got tons of ways to apply the rules, to play the game. Scrum only defines the rules of the game. How you apply them, how you play the game is totally up to us, up to the teams. And that's also what a lot of companies miss. They impose not just the rules of the game, but also how to play the game. And that takes out all of the, some teams will play very offensive, otherwise maybe defensive, whatever. They might apply different strategies and different tactics. And so I wanted to make that clear in my book. Yeah, Michael, I think you raised your hand.
Yes, I raise your hand because I think you described very well the reason that urged you to write the book, which again goes back to the fact you're a very humble person. So you doubt of yourself despite having contributed to Scrum so much. So my question is, in the latest version, the fourth edition, right, you address the point of the future of Scrum. And the reason why I'm asking this question is because we all spend a lot of time on LinkedIn and we read this nonsense of Agile is dead, these kind of things. And the same is about Scrum is dead, like these rules are not applicable. So what is your take on the evolution, how Scrum could help an ever-changing need for embracing not only innovation, but the humanizing the workspace in the age of AI, for instance? So what is your take on that?
Humanizing the workplace is still an important challenge. Look around you. Certainly in Belgium, I look at the statistics of burnouts. It just keeps increasing. And I honestly wondered, how bad must it get? How much worse must it get before people start realizing that we're doing something fundamentally wrong in how we treat people? And it connects a little bit to, so in the start of my book, as Michael, I describe what I call the industrial paradigm. And then moving to the agile paradigm, which is paradigm, a very different way of thinking, a very different set of beliefs. And what we used to do, certainly software development, the waterfall process is an expression of industrial thinking. It's as if software development is an industrial process, which is totally not the case. So that's a big problem. But what I fear most about the current state of Scrum is not that Scrum is dead, because Scrum is everywhere. Agile is everywhere. There are still people doing waterfall development, and with waterfall development, I really mean the traditional waterfall development of separating specific types of work in phases done by specialists and so on, and throwing work over the wall to each other. In the end, a majority of companies is trying to work in iterations or in sprints with hopefully some idea of multidisciplinary teams. But my biggest fear, Michael, is not the fact that Scrum is dead, yes and no. Scrum is not dead because it's everywhere and people are applying it. And people still need a lot of help in it, to grow in it, to become more sophisticated in it, to get more out of it. So that is still happening. Scrum is dead, yes, because we have gone from what I call massive waterfall to some sort of massive Scrum. In that sense, Scrum is massively being applied around the world. And there's also a lot of people thinking that they've seen it all now, that they know it, that they've been there, done that, and so on. They haven't seen anything sophisticated yet. But so that is a problem. Is there a lot of value in Scrum? Yes, absolutely. But is there a lot of openness in people and organizations to become more sophisticated at it? I'm afraid not. And AI for me is a beautiful tool. It's a beautiful help. It makes us more powerful, more insights, whatever. But it's never going to replace people, certainly not currently. Certainly not given the current state of what people call AI, because the current state of AI is far from artificial intelligence, what the word says. It's probabilistic, it's based on what we feed them, it's pattern recognition, it does amazing things with language, absolutely, but it's far from intelligence. And the funny thing is, my oldest son is studying philosophy. And last semester, he had one of his courses was about AI and philosophy or AI and ethics actually. And he did some work around it. He also created a paper as part of his study. And his conclusion was currently the state of AI, the requirement is still what he called, and he found a paper about it, which is called human in the loop. That means AI cannot function or perform autonomously. Far from. You need a human in the loop to check on work and so on. I've checked in with several developers that I know, and they all say the same. I can't trust code generated by whatever tool. I have to look into it. I have to check it, whatever. It makes life easier for me. It might it certainly speeds up things, but a human in the loop is absolutely necessary. But then again, talking about that massive use of Scrum across the world, a strange thing happened with Scrum that when I talked about Scrum as a frame within which you need practices and people, the strange thing is, I don't know if anybody knows the technology adoption lifecycle by Jeffrey Moore, but Jeffrey Moore talks about the adoption of innovative and disruptive products. And I applied the technology adoption lifecycle on Agile because it was a highly disruptive paradigm, a very new way of working in our beautiful world. And Jeffrey Moore has described something that is called a chasm, a sort of black period where a new product had been adopted by visionaries, by pioneers, by early adopters. So adoption grows, and then suddenly it's unclear what is happening with the product. And that's what Jeffrey Moore called the chasm. And some products die in the chasm. Yeah, they never come out of it. The product that come out of it suddenly seem to explode and boom. And as I described, Agile as a new disruptive paradigm came out of the chasm, crossed the chasm around 2006, 2007. And what unfortunately happened, because Scrum was the leading methodology, whatever you want to call it, within the Agile paradigm. And a lot of organizations that was part of crossing the chasm, suddenly a lot of organizations wanted to do Scrum. They all wanted to do Scrum because everybody else was doing it. So it was no longer visionaries and pioneers and so on. It was people in the beginning that really wanted to help solve their problems, but also a lot of people that are, and that's a strange tendency with management and leadership, even up to the CXO levels, that they often, it seems, they like to imitate or copy paste what other companies are doing. So that's happening with ING a lot, by the way. ING started promoting what they call the Spotify model, and suddenly financial banks, financial institutes across Europe all wanted to do that because they had produced beautiful marketing videos about it. So all companies wanted to go for Scrum. They had no idea why. They had no idea they couldn't explain, articulate what was driving them. They had also no idea what they were getting themselves into, but it was the new big thing. And then unfortunately, all those companies believe that if we now start doing Scrum, and I repeat, Scrum is in a way only a way to organize, to manage the work. It doesn't tell you how to do the work. And all those companies had no idea. They thought, oh, we're now going to work in sprints, we're going to follow the ceremonies and so on, and all will magically work out. It doesn't work like that. So that's that strange belief in magic. And everybody was forgetting that within Scrum only create a frame. What happens, the beauty is what happens within the frame. And they all were focusing on the frame. We're now working in sprints of 2 weeks. So where is the result? Where is the return? Where are the higher benefits and so on? So that's incredibly strange of companies. And by now I have no idea how I ended up in this, but still. How did I get here, Michael? Do you know?
How did I?
How did I get up in this discussion or this?
Because I've asked you about the future of Scrum, right?
Oh, yeah. This sort of massive adoption of Scrum around the world has been great, but the big downside is that people have no idea what it really is about. They just do it because they're told to do so and so on. And my biggest fear is that that's one of the changes, not a change, that's something that I emphasize in the latest edition of my Scrum guide, of my Scrum Pocket Guide a lot more, is that Scrum should be, Agile and Scrum should be the engine of deep systemic change. And most organizations think that, okay, we're going to become Agile, we're going to tell our teams that they should do Scrum. So we establish a number of teams, and that's it. while introducing Scrum cannot be done without having a serious impact on all the processes and governance and procedures on top of that. Because Scrum is fundamentally different than what used to be Prince2 or even the PMP, honestly. Scrum is so different that you can't have the same structures around Scrum and getting all of the benefits out of Scrum. That is impossible. But that is what organizations are scared of. That means my biggest problem is Scrum, yes, but have you used Scrum to actually replace the waterfall thinking? And that is what a lot of companies have not done. They still have people working in silo departments. It's just not individuals anymore, but it's little teams that they've established within those boundaries. It's not really multidisciplinary cross-functional teams that have all the skills and the capabilities in one team to manage and develop all aspects of a product as one team without having to throw work from one team to another team and throw it back and throw it to another team and so on.
Yes.
So in that sense, a lot of organizations don't think about what are we hoping to achieve with Scrum in terms of outcome, in terms of the impact of the work. Because in the industrial paradigm, pyramid structures with silos and so, it's all based in a way of not trusting the people having to do the work.
Yep.
It's all based on disrespect for their creative and cognitive abilities. And that's why we create all those heavy structures on top of those people to control them, to tell them what you should do at what point of time and how that should be documented and so on, how that work should be thrown over to another party and so on, what meetings should take place. And so organizations are not using Scrum to rethink those organizational structures because it's also not in their nature. They don't accept that type of change. They resist that type of change. And what I said in my book, more agile teams does not make a more agile organization. So they've all established agile teams, but they're not changing how they deal with quality, how they deal with governance, how they deal with procedures and so on. So that means the benefits they will get out of Scrum are upfront limited because they don't really free up things. And I remember a long time ago at ING and the other companies that I worked with, that I talked with Lean Six Sigma people, I've talked with quality auditors, ISO types of things and so on. And I had really great, fruitful conversations with them because most of them were able to explain to me the purpose of those rules and governance and bureaucracy and paperwork and forms. They were able to explain the purpose of those things without thinking about the actual implementation. And then by going back to the purpose of governance and the purpose of auditing and so on, then we could devise a way to fulfill that purpose, but with Scrum. So change the implementation of it. But most organizations are totally not open for that. So my biggest fear is that the waterfall thinking is still very alive in the minds of people, in the minds of management leadership as well.
Okay. There are some hands up. Please, probably it's time for some questions.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering, what's your view on scaling Scrum, like Scrum of Scrums, and there are quite a few concepts.
One of the problems is that people thinking of scaling in terms of a volume. They think in terms of we need to grow, we need to become bigger. Where I think that growth is also in becoming better at what you do. So you have a sort of a implementation, let's say, a manifestation of highly dysfunctional Scrum, and you try to scale that, you will scale your dysfunctions exponentially. So that is a problem. The first ambition should be, I believe, to be better at what you do. Before adding people, before adding teams, get more out of what you have by improving self-organization, by humanizing the workplace, by creating an inspiring, engaging environment for people, by allowing people to do what they're really good at, by providing them with tools and practices and authorizations to systems so that they can really do stuff, by suggesting great development practices. So there's so much you can do. It's at some point I've called it maximizing Scrum, because by the start of the session, Michael, you pointed out to the word Nexus. So long time ago at Scrum the Talk, we created a framework that we in the end named Nexus. In the beginning, it was just called Scaled Professional Scrum because we had Professional Scrum and then we had a scaled version of that. And we created something that was called Nexus or Scaled Professional Scrum. It was about replicating what one Scrum team is able to do by sort of replication model rather than a volume-oriented thing. And I've already seen some people smile that you would scale dysfunctional Scrum, and we called it Nexus. And when I wrote an article to announce Nexus to the world, I said you have to maximize your Scrum first. Because if you don't maximize your Scrum, if you don't do Scrum in the first place properly, decently, what are you then scaling? And I remember having a pretty nasty response from people in the scaling world and so on, saying, "Oh, what do you mean? What do you mean?" I said, "Yeah, if you don't do Scrum and you want to scale it, it's not scaled Scrum because what are you scaling?" So that was one aspect. What I dislike a little bit in all the scaling discussion since those years is that both Ken as well as Jeff Sutherland started saying that the Scrum Guide is Scrum for one team only. And I don't agree at all. What the Scrum Guide describes are the rules of the game. And the rules of the game remain the same also in a scaled environment.
I agree 100%.
Just scaling it means wanting to do more with more teams, means you have to apply different tactics and create the frame of the boundaries. In my book already in 2013, before the topic of the future state of Scrum, I described about tactics of Scrum, and I described about how to do Scrum with one team. I call that single team Scrum, and then how to do Scrum with multiple teams, and I call that multi-team Scrum. And one of the biggest problems with what people call scaled Scrum or scaled Agile, whatever you want to call it, is that scaled Scrum starts with multiple teams working on the same product. Product is the starting point of Scrum. Scaled Scrum means multiple teams working on the same product because the product is not progressing fast enough. People want more features or capabilities available and so on. That's a reason to potentially scale. But it starts with product. That means one product owner, one product backlog, and then multiple teams of developers working from that product backlog. And that just from the outside, an external perspective, that would just look like Scrum. You've got a product owner, product backlog, teams working on that. And as a result of the work of the teams, increments of that product are being released and put into production. So it's still just Scrum. So the rules of Scrum are the same. You just need different practices, different tactics to apply that. And one of the things might be what you said, the Scrum of Scrums. I also described it in my book. To go against a lot of people's opinions, a Scrum of Scrums is a scaled version of what we call the daily Scrum. The daily Scrum is a synchronization, replanning point within a team. A Scrum of Scrum is a scaled version of that, meaning a replanning, synchronization point, preferably on a daily basis, by the way. So I always say it should happen daily across the multiple teams working on the product so that you intercept integration problems as soon as possible so they don't accumulate and then only get treated by the end of the sprint, which blows up things anyhow. So just when you talk about the Scrum of Scrums. And I remember in 2016, when I left Scrum the Talk, I was, by accident, at the same time, was asked by Air France KLM, the airline company, to come work with them. And I did exactly multi-team Scrum as described in my book with Air France KLM, with people from Toulouse, Paris, and Amsterdam in 4 teams, spread across different regions, with a lot of business people in Amsterdam, project management people in Paris, and then developers, mainly IT people, maybe in Toulouse. And we did it with 4 teams, and it worked out incredibly. There was also time pressure. In that sense, Air France KLM had really stringent methodologies and processes to follow, very big, very whatever. And we were able to not follow them because we just did it hands-on. So we escaped the watchtowers of the governance people in some way.
Yeah.
And what was so fascinating is that after a 3 or 4 sprints, I was so happy to see that people were amazed over what they were able to do. They never thought they were able to do that because they had never been allowed to do that. They were amazing themselves. And that satisfied me even the most. And believe me, certainly Air France, I don't know if you have some French people, if you talk about bureaucracy, please go to a big company in France and you will know what big bureaucracy is about.
Italy as well, as Antonio might confirm. Yeah, the love for bureaucracy as a method of controlling is something shared in many countries.
Yeah, so those people were like really the crazy thing about that work for Air France KLM. So I started working with them in July, I think probably 2016, I think, or I don't know. I'm old. It was 2018, so I don't know. But the assignment, they ended the assignment by the end of the year. After a number of sprints, things were like really going well. But the product owner of the whole thing, by the way, it was rewriting their complete customer loyalty program. The blue, what's it called, blue thing, something. So it was not a really small thing. It was huge, it was immense, and it was really going very well. But at some point in time, the product owner of the whole thing decided to take up another position within the company. It was a Dutch lady, and she was replaced by another guy. And he decided that he was too important to be just a product owner.
Oh,
So he decided not to do that. It left us suddenly, behind my back, a situation with 4 teams, no longer for one product owner, but each team having their own product owners. And he also had only worked before that with SAFe, the Scaled Agile framework, and he came up with this idea, yes, but where's the program increment, Gunther? And where's the this? And I said, and I stuck a knife through my own heart by saying, yeah, but no worries, we're doing the simplest version of SAFe. To not say that it was Scrum. I say, yeah, no worries, we do the simplest version of SAFe. That means our increment just is the same as the program increment. No, so he wanted things to go slower. So it was crazy. So I was happy that they terminated my assignment. By the same time, they were doing that.
Sorry to interrupt. We've got about 4 minutes to finish, just to give you time to check.
Yeah, it's good. But any open questions, because I feel like I've been talking a lot. I hope you liked it. I hope it resonates. But it was just, I hope you don't mind just freely improvising stuff.
Indeed,
I like
I
that
think
much.
it did to everyone, but it would be nice to hear the voice of the guests. If anyone has a question.
No, I'll just chip in. I'll just say, Gunther, it's fascinating listening to your stories and anecdotes. Really appreciate your insights into the methodology, and I can relate that to how we practice Scrum in the world. So it's good. So appreciate your time and insight.
Okay, thank you.
Sandra.
You say a lot of people practice Scrum by the letter, but not by the philosophy behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, and because they are so focused on that process aspect is because they're still stuck in that industrial way of thinking.
Okay.
Yeah, I must say, I love where you started with the whole talk of the human aspect and the people side of. I came to project management because I love the task, the completion, the structure, the progress, the execution, and I've stayed because the people development opportunities are so huge. You want to be a project leader that people want to work with, work for. How do you create that environment that people want to come back and work on projects with you again? Yeah, I love that. So that's where you started your journey. So that's fantastic. Thank you. Cool.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay. Thank you very much. Antonio, any final, or Michael, any final words before we go to close out?
I have a confession to make, which is after knowing Gunther and translating his work, there was a big connection with this idea of humanizing the workplace and caring about people. And it was something I always thought it was part of me, but I could not formalize. And so that gave me purpose. And then now that I find myself in coaching leaders in embracing agility, not to do agile, I very frequently refer to this industrial paradigm. And I told them, you are in a trap. You're not aware. Let me help you to realize that you are in a trap. And I will help you to get out of that if you like it. And 9 out of 10, once they realize they're trapped, they want to get out. And embracing the power of self-organized individuals, self-sufficient teams that can make the difference is something that I definitely took from you, Gunther. So I'm very grateful for that.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much, everybody. I have really enjoyed being thrown in and finding out all about Gunther's book. So thank you so much, everybody, for a wonderful discussion, and have a great rest of your evening.